Chapter 39. Fix Her. Dr. Paul Kinder, his daughter Bree, and Kelsey Lang navigated the steep hilly roads on their way to Colton. After rescuing Kelsey, they located exactly what Paul hoped to find, a mobile medical unit. When he heard gunfire, Paul pulled his large vehicle over to the side of the road. From where he sat, Paul could see the superstore and its parking lot. He glanced at the girls. "You know what to do, Dad." Bree pointed at their old neighbors. "That's Aaron and Kurt down there." "You sure?" "Yep, that's them all right, propped up against the car there." Paul peered over his daughter's side of the vehicle. Aaron and Kurt sat on the pavement, holding a gun on 4 other tied men. He drove into the parking lot, eyeing the scene as he went. There was no doubt a shootout took place here. Many of the scattered vehicles were riddled with bullet holes, and at least 3 men had injuries consistent with bullet wounds. Paul rolled up beside Aaron and Kurt, but when he went to get out of the car, they stopped him. "Doc," Aaron said around a swollen lip, "it sure is great to see you, but you need to go on and find the Coles." Aaron waved at the woods behind him. They went that way, after Sky Jackson and Jesse Bailey. "We've heard screams." Paul nodded and turned to the girls. "I'm leaving you here to start on Aaron and Kurt's wounds. Check on Aaron and Kurt the way I taught you. Do not go near the other men, or distract Aaron and Kurt from keeping an eye on them. Keep your weapon on you at all times." Kelsey and Bree quickly nodded. They knew the drill. This wasn't the first time they'd come across people who needed help. They each grabbed a ready emergency kit and headed over to the brothers. Paul pulled a large, black tote bag from the back containing a large selection of emergency supplies and ran the way Aaron pointed. Since neither Dylan nor Wade were regular patients, he hoped they would recognize him. Paul winced as one shot, then a second echoed through the trees. A flock of birds took flight, and everything was still for a moment. A roar shattered the silence. Small creatures scurried in fear, and the heavy thuds of men fighting filtered through the woods. Paul wasn't eager to join the fight, but he'd never been one to turn his back on someone in need either. He pushed through a final layer of brush and halted, throwing his hands in the air. The scene was one Paul would never forget. The wild men of Colton had become wilder. A shirtless Jessie stretched over Sky, one hand holding his bunched-up shirt to her bloody middle, the other on the leafy ground steadying him. His body shielded her as his stare fixed on Paul as he emerged from the brush. A look of pure resolve covered Jessie's young face. Dylan stood guard, taunt and towering over both the woman and boy. Ready, with his crossbow in hand, and an icy glare in his eyes. Wade stood to his left, his own crossbow raised and his jaw firm. If Paul wasn't already certain of their fierce determination to protect Sky, the low growl he swore was coming from the 3 of them proved it. Paul's heart thumped. He had seconds to speak before an arrow found a bullseye in him. "I'm Paul, a doctor. I'm the doctor from Colton," Wade said. With those words, the weapons dropped, and Dylan motioned him over, his fierce expression turning to worry. "Can you help her, Doc?" On his way, Paul saw 4 men laid out on the ground, 2 beaten, 1 twisted up, and 1 shot dead. He glanced at Dylan out of the side of his eye. How glad Paul was to be on the right side of the wild Cole brothers. He didn't say a word. It was clear these men would receive no treatment until Sky was cared for. Crouching beside Sky, he examined her. Dylan, Wade, and Jesse barely gave him enough room, but he managed. Blood oozed from the numerous cuts covering her body and face. Several large bruises already formed, including one on her forehead. Her shoulder was at an odd angle. Paul winced, hoping it was an easy fix. The bullet would be, by far, her most serious injury. He worried it nicked an organ. While working, Paul glanced at Jesse. "How is it you and Sky are here with the Coles?" "Sky, Wade, and Dylan saved me from my dad. We live with them now." Paul looked at Dylan. Dylan stared back as if daring Paul to object. Paul didn't. Instead, he said, I should be able to help her, as long as there isn't more damage than I'm anticipating once I get in there. Okay, where? Dylan quickly scanned the area. How soon? Back in the parking lot. I have a mobile medical trailer. When Dylan rushed to pick up Sky, Paul put a hand out to stop him. Whoa, carefully, carefully. Slow and easy, that's the way we do this. Dylan gave a sharp nod. I can do that.
Dylan wiped the sweat from his forehead before he gently picked Sky up. His body was out of control, sweating and chilling at the same time. If Dylan let himself think at all, his mind immediately went to life without her. He was terrified. Dylan did what he had seen Sky do many times. He hauled in a deep breath and slowly let it out. He could do this. Pick her up and walk back to the parking lot. Everything would be okay. The instant those words ran through his mind, he regretted it. They felt like a lie. On the trip through the woods, Sky groaned a few times, and Dylan reassured her. She didn't fully wake, and everyone was grateful for that. Once they arrived at the medical trailer, Dylan carefully laid Sky on the exam table. He leaned over her, and tenderly pushed her hair out of her bloodied face. Darlin'. Her green eyes fluttered open. Sky uttered a low groan but offered a little smile when she saw Dylan looking down at her. She attempted to raise a hand to touch his face. When Sky failed, Dylan took her hand in both of his larger ones and bent his cheek to her. He needed to feel her warm touch. They gazed at each other before Sky drifted off again. Paul started an IV. When he saw Dylan watching him, he explained. Fluids. And meds to keep her sedated while I do my work. Then Paul turned to Dylan, attempting the most dangerous task he needed to perform, asking this man to leave. Dylan, if you would like to step out, I can begin. I ain't going anywhere. Dylan, I need to concentrate on this. I can't do that if a family member is here. So if you could step out. Dylan stared at Paul, letting him know what he thought. He didn't move. Paul ignored his stubbornness. It wasn't the first time and wouldn't be the last someone worried about their loved one. And if you could send Bree in here, she will assist me. She's a kid. I'll help you. Dylan's gruff voice broke. I sent her out there. I did this. I can't leave her now, don't ask it. I don't know what happened, but I know you would never intentionally hurt this woman. You mooned over her before this all started. Frankly, I didn't think you stood a chance. Paul laughed. Guess I was wrong. I didn't stand a chance. Then the world ended, and everything changed. Dylan bent his head over Sky. Paul put a hand on Dylan's shoulder. You don't want to be here. I promise Bree is an excellent assistant. This would be a good time to get those men who did this back here and locked up in one of those trucks. Dylan nodded. Keeping busy probably was the best thing. But before Dylan answered, a bang at the door and raised voices alerted them to Jesse's presence. I want to see her, and you can't stop me. Dylan grimaced, seeing himself in Jesse. Let the boy see her, then we'll go and let you be about your work. Paul nodded, and Dylan opened the door. Jesse burst in, almost tripping into the vehicle as he did so. Dylan righted him. Hey, slow it down, boy. Jesse fixed his gaze on Paul. Did you fix her? Not yet, as soon as you've seen her. Jesse moved to Sky's side and looked down at her. But you're gonna, right? Jesse pleaded as he raised his hope-filled eyes back to Paul. That was something a doctor could rarely answer with certainty, and Dylan knew it. He saved Paul from being forced to respond. He's gonna do his best. Say what you want to say, and we'll let him get to it. Jesse laid his head on Sky's upper arm and moved her hand to sit on the back of his head, mimicking the many times she'd smoothed his hair. He stayed there for a minute, murmuring in her ear before standing up and scrubbing at his eyes. Jesse narrowed his eyes at Paul. You better do a good job. My very best, I swear. Jesse threw another suspicious look over his shoulder at Paul as he left.